Infiniti finally has an all-new full-sized luxury SUV to compete with the latest competitors from Cadillac, Jeep, Lexus, and Lincoln, and perhaps even BMW or Mercedes. The 2025 QX80 is a ground-up redesign of one of the brand's most iconic and revered models, and the price certainly rises with the added levels of luxury. Let's check it out. So yes, while the new QX80 is more expensive than before, Infiniti tells us that its lowest two trims are now comparably equipped to the outgoing model's most expensive trim. The prices on your screen include the $1,995 destination fee. We are only getting to drive the tip-top autograph trim on this drive, which comes standard with every new feature Infiniti has thrown at this thing. Heated third-row seats, heated and ventilated massaging first and second row captain's chairs, their Level 2 hands-free Pro Pilot Assist 2.1 system, the Klipsch Reference 24-speaker audio system, an exterior light show they call Infiniti Light Path, an air suspension and dynamic digital suspension, and Nissan and Infiniti's new Android Automotive infotainment system with Google built in. There's actually a lot more than that, but I need to catch my breath.
Don't worry, wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are both standard, and like every other iteration of this system, you do get built-in Google Maps and Google Assistant, as well as the ability to download apps from the Google Play Store, such as Spotify and Waze. But since this is not an electric car from GM, I presume you'll just stick to tethering your phone.
The infotainment system has a few other features and camera views that make it easier to park the car and to have a more enjoyable road trip experience. For example, there is that super wide front camera view like you saw in the opening shot that helps with seeing things that you might not be able to in front of that massive nose. Like a C8 Corvette with its memory-linked suspension lift system, you can geotag spots where this camera will always pop up on your screen in case you regularly park in a difficult spot and you don't want to run over any valuable items like children. There are also the usual bird's eye and hood views you'll find in other luxury cars and even some non-luxury cars. It even has a built-in dash cam that features a separate selfie camera you can use to record carpool karaoke and whatever else you might want to memorialize from your time in the car. You can fold all of the rear seats up or down from here, open your garage, and control the comprehensive ambient lighting. The only two complaints I would file here are the fact that this UI, though sharp and snappy, looks a little too much like what you might find in a Nissan product. Though to be fair, Lexus uses a nearly carbon copy of Toyota's audio multimedia system in its products too. Also, those cameras are cool, but the stitching of the multiple angles and the overall quality doesn't seem to keep up with what others are putting out there. Oh, and I guess I'll complain about the separation of the two screens here in the middle. I do hope that in a future update, Infiniti picks up the same supplier Genesis has used for its latest interiors so that we can have a full widescreen in here.
As far as the interior goes, Infiniti clearly did a lot to make sure this felt elevated over the outgoing QX80, and it absolutely feels like the fanciest Infiniti that they've ever made. And while I'm pretty impressed with what they've done, there are some areas where, there are materials that are hard where other competitors might have soft stuff. Now keep in mind this is a pre-production model, so some of that might change, but on the back of the seats this is soft, but a lot of the materials down lower on the door panels and in the cabin are completely hard plastic. I'm also not a huge fan of the excessive use of piano black plastic up front on the dashboard, but that could be a personal taste thing. I'm just not a huge fan of it because, well, it gets scratched easily.
I do think this is still a step above what you'll find in the Lexus LX and Lincoln Navigator though. The automatic biometric heating and cooling system is a unique feature, and the fit and finish overall is top notch. You get powered seats with the heating, cooling, and massaging on the upper trims, but the lowest two trims are still available with the bench back here if you want 8-passenger capacity. Cargo space is generous, but not as big as a Grand Wagoneer, Escalade ESV, or Navigator L. Even the standard length versions of those models are bigger than this. The closest competitor in size and shape would probably be that Lexus LX. For 2025, there's 6% more overall cargo space than before here in the QX80. 17% more behind the second row, and 28% more behind the third row. The third row also feels much more accommodating than before, and on top trims, you get heated seats.
The new power plant in the QX80 follows a common trend. There is no longer a big V8 under this hood. It is now a new Nissan-sourced 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6, making a lot more power than the old V8, 450 horsepower, 516 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to a new 9-speed automatic transmission, well, not a brand new one, but one of Nissan's newer 9-speeds, and that replaces the old 7-speed, and it definitely feels like it shifts quicker and is a little bit smoother than that old transmission. The switch to the twin-turbo V6 from the V8 does yield improved fuel economy figures, but not quite as much as you'd expect. You now have 16 miles per gallon in the city, 20 on the highway, and 18 combined for rear-wheel drive models, and 15 city, 19 highway, 17 combined for the four-wheel drive models. This engine also enables up to 8,500 pounds of towing, which is a little bit better than a Cadillac Escalade, but less than the regular Jeep Wagoneer. If you do go for the more luxurious Grand Wagoneer, this does beat that out by a little bit and is a closer competitor to this anyway. It's important to note that we are in the top Autograph trim, which does give you the air suspension and the digital suspension. That is their version of an adaptive suspension that reads the road ahead to adjust the dampers to give you a smooth ride in all road surface conditions. And I can feel it working. It's definitely a pretty smooth experience, but you do still feel jitters on the road if the pavement is a little bit rougher than usual. However, the air suspension is nice because we don't really crash over big undulations in the road, and the body roll is pretty well controlled. Infiniti actually wants us to push this in the corners, so I'm going to do that right now. This all-new platform that the QX80 rides on is much stiffer than the outgoing models, and you definitely feel that out on the road, especially one like this. This feels a little bit more Germanic than before. Perhaps not quite as Germanic as the actual Germans, but close enough that I think it does allow you to justify the higher price of this new generation. Also on Sensory and Autograph trims, you get Infiniti's new ProPilot Assist 2.1 hands-free drive assist. It is mainly restricted to highways right now. It's not going to be as expansive as Super Cruise from GM, but it is a level 2 system, so once it is engaged, I can actually take my hands off the wheel, but I have to keep my eyes on the road just like any other level 2 system. Unlike Super Cruise though, there is no hands-free lane change assist. You do actually have to put your hands back on the wheel to do that, but it does still assist you in that process, taking the stress out of highway driving. Alright, so I've taken my hands off the wheel. The system in front of me on the head-up display and the instrument cluster will turn blue. That's how you know that it is engaged or it is ready to engage. So all I have to do now is just keep my eyes on the road, stop looking over at you, and enjoy the ride. If you don't get a car with the 2.1 system, you will still have ProPilot 1.1. That is a level 1 hands-on system, but it's a pretty advanced one. It'll still do the lane tracing, adaptive cruise, lane keeping assist, all of that stuff that you're used to. And it will also not require you to have to like jiggle the steering wheel every time you take your hands off the wheel and you know, want to do that intermittently. Some cars will make you do that whole like to let it know. This, you actually only have to just tap the steering wheel. It has haptic feedback and it has a sensor in there that only looks for the touch of your hand. So that's nice compared to some other systems out there. As we come to a stop here, the last thing I'll point out is the new Klipsch reference sound system. On the Sensory and Autograph trims, you get a 24 speaker version of this. Lower trims will get a 14 speaker one with 600 watts. This one's 1200 watts and is very, very powerful. We even have headrest speakers for the front driver and passenger. You can actually set the sound system to only play music up front, which you've seen in other cars before, but that actually also directs the music you hear into these speakers. Otherwise, it's mainly used for voice guidance from the navigation or other like things like Bluetooth phone calls for the driver, specific driver or passenger situations like that. It's pretty cool. I will say though, I think the Macintosh stereo in the Jeep Grand Wagoneer is a little bit more impressive than what I've heard in this so far, but I'd have to take it home for more testing to really get a good idea of how this sounds. The 2025 QX80 goes on sale at the end of July, but before you decide on pulling the trigger, you'll need to ask yourself a few important questions. Is any Infiniti worth over $100,000? This is the first one to ever do it, and while I do think they have made a bunch of cool changes that help justify that premium, there's a lot of technology in here that is not quite as polished as what you'll find in a Cadillac Escalade or Jeep Grand Wagoneer. You'll also have to ask yourself, is it big enough? A Grand Wagoneer completely dwarfs this, especially in cargo and the third row. So if that is something that's important to you, yeah, you might want to go look over there instead. I think the closest competitor to this is the Lexus LX. It's similarly designed, shaped, it has a very similar powertrain, and a very similar interior. It's of course always up to you to decide what your heart desires in your next vehicle. I can't tell you what that is, I can only help guide you. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.